Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us on this rainy Thursday evening for the second iteration of the Curatorial Lectures, which is a series that Curatorial Studies is organizing in collaboration with S.M.A.K and the University of Ghent. It's a series of lectures that we've been organizing for a couple of years now, always revolving around a certain theme. Last year, for example, we were discussing the notion of curating at the nexus of change. And this year we're addressing an entirely different question, which is the curated institution. We were wondering, how do curators, when they become artistic directors, which is an entirely different sort of job, adopt certain curatorial strategies within the institution. So this year we again invited 4 different curators, amongst which Luca Pinto. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know Luca Pinto from working together with him at La Loge on a Nathalie Dupasquier exhibition. He also curated a big Nathalie Dupasquier exhibition at Kunst Halloween, where he was the curator for 5 years. And now he's the director of Macro Museum in Rome, which he will be talking about tonight. So thank you so much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Okay, so thanks, Laura, and it's working. So good evening. It's unusual time to give a talk. Nice time. Maybe we should drink. Usually I don't prepare PowerPoint, so I'm sure there will be many mistakes or strange kind of bizarre lines or blurry images. So I decided to title this lecture like this. I don't have any plans. I'm fumbling around because it's a motto by an artist, Emilio Prini, who was a major figure from Arte Povera. And when I was studying, I spent lots of time with him. And this motto, in a way, it's quite... I find myself a lot, I recognize myself a lot in this sort of attitude, meaning that I still don't know how I make exhibitions, and that's why it's still exciting to do it. And before talking about the program at Macro, that is the museum that I'm directing since 3 years, I'd just like to point out a few exhibitions I did before, and yeah, just to talk about the way I got there and what it meant also to me to kind of working within an institution as a director. And first of all, I have to admit that I'm not so fond of kind of curatorial schools, in the sense that I don't think you can really like learn how to make shows. I personally study art history, and to me the only way I kind of started to do shows was basically like hanging out with artists, spending time with them, and trying to really listen and kind of recording certain ideas and then elaborate something different. So I studied art history in Rome. So Rome is not really a kind of cutting edge city for contemporary art, and so at the beginning I started my first serious show. um, was in a house museum by of an art historian called Mario Prats, and was a very influential also Anglist. There is this beautiful film by Luchino Visconti, Conversation Pieces, which is one of the last film by Visconti, which was inspired by the figure of Mario Prats, that in the film is played by Berlancaster. And and the reason why I did this show in a house museum was because um, I was talking with certain artists like of older generation, like Luigi Ontani, another artist that I met very early on, with whom I was still working a lot, is Olaf Nicolai. And with Olaf, we both share um, this love towards this specific place, which was the house where Prats lived for many years. And as you can see, is the opposite of a white cube. And and I was immediately attracted by this sort of museums, which are kind of anti-museums in a certain way. And the reason why I was attracted by them um, is because of this idea of thinking of a space as a portrait of a person. So this kind of three-dimensional portrait of a person. And and of course you have, I mean, usually house museums could be also very kitsch, and I like the ones that are kind of frozen in time. And and to me at that time was also a way to kind of dig into the life of someone that I'd never met through a kind of lateral kind of view. And so this show actually started because when I was studying, I worked for a year in a gallery, and this gallery, she had a tiny bookshop inside the gallery space. And when she passed away, she gave me as a gift, as part of her kind of inheritance, her book collection. And with Olaf, that I met through that gallerist, we decided to pay homage to this gallerist, Maria Colau, and by listing an entire bibliography. So all the books she had became the portrait of Maria. And we decided to transfer this um, bibliographical portrait into this space. So the exhibition was actually, we just like flipped through this book collection, which consisted of more than 3,000 volumes, and we pick up some pages uh, or like works that we like. And and this also was, to me, was also another epiphany, in the sense that um, we had no money to do this show, and so we just worked with the reproductions of works. So we just bought some frames and we printed some pages from these books, and we um, position around the house in order to kind of trigger a certain dialogue between the place, which is very interesting, not because of the works that are in the house, because Prats was there are not any single kind of masterpiece in this house, but what makes this house interesting is exactly the relationship between the objects and Prats himself, because he was living surrounded by the works that he was studying. And and um, and to me, also, instead of working, for instance, in a I don't know, in a white cube or in a gallery, I thought, okay, I have to build my own museum, and my museum was consisting of different museums. So I started to work within this specific places, and I'm still kind of very attracted by that. So, for instance, some years later, I did a show in the House Museum of Achille Castiglioni in Milano, the great Italian designer. And in the case of Castiglioni, this was his studio, so was a personal space, but not fully personal, has a kind of his house, and also I like to imagine these places as books, and inviting artists to produce works that are very kind of subtle, um, and they function as a sort of bookmarks, so they don't have to alter the experience you have of of the of these museums. And also I'm very excited by the idea that most of the people that come to visit the houses, these museums, they don't come to visit the shows. They come to visit the museums, and they happen then to find these strange um, um, interventions that they can highlight some kind of minor elements that could be um, I mean, minor elements that then can sort of highlight instead some, maybe some aspects that have been not yet kind of investigated. And so, um, of course, now we have witnessed any sort of trends in terms of um, way of doing exhibitions, or like places where you see exhibitions, and there are also these kind of non-white cube spaces have been completely kind of spoiled, and so you have um, very often they're used in a kind of very exotic ways, and while I think it's also interesting the experience you have, which is completely different from of course the experience you can have of a museum like this, and also from the position of you as an artist or as a curator. You know, there are so kind of dense of elements that is like cooking a dish that has, I don't know, 50 ingredients, and then if you're like dropping in another one, of course resonate in a different way if you have like cooking with just one single ingredient. And so this show in Milano, for instance, this is a work of Austrian artist Christoph Meyer, who did a replica of this iconic lamp by Castiglioni, which inside the house you have the original. So everyone thought that this, of course, was by Castiglioni, and and very often I invite artists to visit the place and then to kind of produce a work, conceive for the space. This is very kind of important, and and this was the first time where I presented the work by a artist that was not alive. It's a piece by Charlotte Posenenske, this one, that I thought would make sense within the world of Castiglioni in terms of industrial design, and next to Posenenske, a designer like Martino Gamper, which is the opposite of Castiglioni, because Castiglioni was really like into the idea of producing an object that can be replicated over and over, while Martino is into kind of almost like unique pieces. And you had like a work by Caro Rama. I mean, it's almost impossible to really detach what's the work and uh, what's the what's in the house, the actual elements of the house, of the studio. And but I also don't. I really like the idea that you visit these house museums and you have always like someone kind of guiding you through the place, and so explaining you a sort of host, which also something that usually like in the uh, contemporary art world we don't like, no any idea of explaining, of being didactic, while I think here it I really think it works. As you are entering in the house of someone else and is kind of showing you around. And for instance, this is Giovanna Castiglioni. She's the daughter of Achille Castiglioni, and she's the person who's kind of doing um, uh, the tours of the studio. And one artist, Patrick Tuttofuoco, uh, he was really um, impressed by the presence of Giovanna, because she's like explaining, also showing where the objects from which Castiglioni was inspired and so on. And so he decided to produce a dress for Giovanna to be worn by her, and was produced with Trussardi. And so is a dress that she was wearing all the time. And at the end of the tour, she had to unveil and open up, and was a portrait of herself. And so these are the type of works. Um, and then, I mean, before this, um, again in Rome, um, I did a show in the house and studio and atelier of Giorgio De Chirico. Um, Also because I really wanted to make shows in places that could be very specific, you know. And so I'm in Rome. Instead of doing a show in like in a random gallery, I thought, okay, what is unique here? And so De Chirico, he lived for um, uh, almost 40 years in this house in Piazza Hispania, really in the center of Rome, until his death at the end of the 70s. And so when De Chirico died, the, they decided to transform the house into a, a public museum, and the president of the De Chirico Foundation is the former lawyer by De Chirico. De Chirico hated modern and contemporary art, and so when I proposed to him the idea of doing a show there, he says, "No way. I dislike with all my art contemporary art. I don't give, like, no way." Then I insisted, and then he told me, "Okay, let's do it. Then if we have bad reviews, I'm going to close the show." I say, "Okay, let's do it. Let's try." And then it went well, and also because I proposed to do a show that um, uh, lasted 1 year, and and so there are two elements here. One is that at the beginning, I instead of waiting for something, I was kind of taking the space. So basically, I was approaching this museum and asking to do a show. And as with Prats, also here, they never had an exhibition before. So these are not house museums where they do regularly exhibitions. And while I was studying at the university, so basically at the same time, I co-founded a magazine and called Nero, which still exists more as a publishing house, and the approach was similar because Rome, in a way, was and still is a kind of periphery, is very peripherical in terms of contemporary culture, and and so this attitude of yeah, uh, I want to have a different type of magazine, I make a new one, and I want to make shows, there is no one offering me a chance to do it, and I found my space. And and for this exhibition also, I had no money, which is still an important element. I did it with 5,000 euros, this show. And I started to basically invite some artists that were maybe stopping by in Rome, or they were living in Rome, and all of them produced new works, and which I'm still amazed. Yeah, by the way, I know how it happened, but yeah, it happened, and so this also idea of not following the rules of, also in terms of time, that a show should be like 2 3 months, whatever, and I thought, okay, imagine like you're writing a book that is published, is distributed in like in the bookshops, and you still have the chance to continue writing. I like that idea, and of course it was also complicated because I started like with a number of artists, and then I was inviting others that I didn't know who could be these others, because it was completely like a bit like the title of the show, of the lecture, and and um, and also in terms of how to communicate this. So the idea that the show is not like a static object is also an element that is quite distinctive of the program at Macro. And so this is, for instance, like this is the tiny bedroom of the Chirico, because he was sleeping in a separate bedroom from the wife, Isabella. And this, for instance, is a piece. This instead is the is the ground floor of the house. Also, it's funny to see how kitsch was the type of furniture, and so he was living in this, yeah, this kind of mid bourgeoisie type of set. Um, so I invited, for instance, Momus, a singer writer, and his piece was him reading an amazing novel by the Chirico, Ebdomero. Also here I invited a designer to conceive a costume uh, that was also in this case um, worn by the person doing the visits. Um, and sometimes you can also discover that, for instance, De Chirico was painting his still life inspired not by reality, by these fake fruits. So was you know mm, also for like De Chirico is a bit like Picasso, is such, is inscribed in the art history, so is a figure that you are also very kind of almost um, I mean, you feel very shy to, to kind of deal with the figure of the Kiriko, because they've been written any sort of books or text, and the Kiriko made, especially during the last period of his life, many d'après of himself. That's why the exhibition is titled D'après Giorgio, and in the house you have only works by the Chirico, and only the late works by the Chirico, which are considered the minor works by the Chirico. Instead, to me, they are like excellent. And here, for instance, one artist decided, he proposed me, okay, my piece, I want to sleep in the De Chirico bed, sorry. And so this is the photo of Marcello sleeping there, and or Darren Bader, an artist, like his work was pointing out a wall where there was used to be display a painting by De Chirico that Darren really loved, but he was not present at that time of the show because was somewhere for another exhibition, and so his piece was titled "Missing the Chirico Painting." So the person giving the tour had to point that portion of the wall. Or this instead is another house museum. In this case, it was a solo show of an artist called Luigi Ontani, a performer. Also, in this case, the show started out of a conversation with Luigi, who in the 70s he made many of these tableaux vivants, and in the last, I would say, 30 years, he mainly produced these masks in Bali, working with local artisans and creating this hybrid between uh, between the traditional masks that they produced there and his own kind of imagery. And some of these masks has some kind of musical elements. And he told me, one day I would love to show these masks together. And and in Rome, another house museum is this museum of Henrik Andersen, who was a dandy, a sculptor, mainly a dandy. He was also he had an affair with Henry James, and so he bought an entire uh, building palazzo in Rome, and in the ground floor um, there is this gypsotech with this kind of weird and cheesy sculptures. Um, and we decided to exhibit the masks using the statues as pedestals. And so this also is another way to kind of activate this sort of places. And I also asked Charlemagne Palestine to conceive a soundtrack for the room, and because Charlemagne and Luigi knew each other from the 70s, and Charlemagne told me, okay, ask Luigi to perform something with a mask, and then send me the recording. I will do something with that. So there was this kind of drone on top of the sound of each mask, and and then we also produce a book with a Swiss artist, graphic designer, Izzat Sheshivari, and the book had many covers with the reproduction of all the masks as cutouts, and then there were some very early works by Luigi, which in Italy is super well known, and so he asked Luigi to present uh, really the works that he did when he was like in his early 20s. This is a work that I really love. He did it in when he was living in Bologna in the north of Italy, and he picked up. So you see the palette of like the palette of color, and so he picked up from the telephone book the names of people that were named, for instance, Signor Rossi, like Rosso. So he was calling everyone saying, okay, I'm Luigi Ontani, I'm doing this work, I would like to take a photo of you. So he was putting like, replacing in the palette, putting the red with a photo of someone named Red. And then there was also the recording and the palette and the photo of him holding the actual palette. So this is instead the very last show I did in a house museum, this time in Ljubljana. Um, and almost to close the loop, this time I did with Olaf Nicolai as curator. And Jože Plečnik is one of the most important Slovenian architects. And he lived for most of his life in this house. The house has also a small exhibition space, which is not so beautiful, but the house instead is amazing. And there was the anniversary from his birth, and we had the occasion to do an exhibition inside the house for the very first time. And in this case, I read a newspaper that the house produced describing the history of the house, and there was an article about this woman who worked in the house for Plečnik, and so we decided to have her as a voice, as a sort of Trojan horse to kind of activate the show. So there was a text written by us, pretending to be her, and so the title is Dear Jože, I'm only the housekeeper, and also, for instance, in this exhibition, also the design of the invite, the design of the booklet was done by Julie Peters, that you might know. And also Julie, everyone is like part of the exhibition. So even like I asked a photographer to document the show, and this was part of the exhibition. So every single element was really part of it. And this is the invite. This is a work by Monica Bonvicini. She collected the keys of all the studios and apartments she lived, and so we hang in front of the entrance. Karsten Nikolai did he put like hidden in some in two places, in two different rooms, these metronomes that started together, but then they started to go at different rhythms, a bit like the González Torres clocks. Diamond Stingley, and sometimes what I like of also working in such places, and is also what I like of making exhibitions, is that you can create encounters also that never happen in the reality. So, for instance, I ask two person working in the museums to go to the cinema and to watch the new film on David Bowie, and then we put the tickets inside the house as Plečnik was still alive, and or I positioned some books of a book by Claes Oldenburg about the unrealized projects for a public monument, which is an amazing book by Oldenburg. And since Plečnik made and realized many public monuments, I thought would be an interesting dialogue between Plečnik and Oldenburg. And also this, for instance, are photos of the house that, so I asked the photographer, Joanna Silva, to take photos of the show, and immediately after we put the photos within the house using like existing frames. And so I think it's very important not to alter the way these places functions, and are it's a bit like an ongoing deposit of memories about stories that you can kind of enhance through the addition, through the presence of these works, but also the fact that the exhibition is functioning through the voice of the person giving the tours is also an important element, because imagine they have to tell about the works, to tell about the show, as they're telling about the house. At a certain point, they start to describe the show in a very personal way, and so after the opening, I attended the tour, and the guy didn't know that I did a show, and it was very interesting because he was describing the work also not in a uh, not giving all the precise information, but I think that's exactly what I like, and that there is no objectivity. Everything is very kind of become a personal story of a place that is seen as a deposit of history, which is also the idea of the museum. Um, Also, this is a piece by Hanna Miletic, and or like we imagine um, um, yeah, this woman going to buy some vegetables and fruits, and we put in the kitchen, and here also I would like just to mention a few other shows, and if you want to start, please do. But just to give you a feeling of the approach, and also this is a show I did in Vienna, also with Marley, who is here by chance, amazing. So this show, um, uh, I mean, as I said, I'm still, and I've been always interested about what an exhibition could be, and this show was a bit inspired by a book by Raymond Queneau. Is a book of poems where you have different lines and you can create different poems out of it. So I asked all these artists to make a piece for an exhibition where basically I installed the exhibition for the opening, and from the day after, all the works were deinstalled and they were placed on the floor, and there were some like not captioned, just was written who was the artist, who produced that object, and every visitor had the possibility, was not forced of course, to reinstall the exhibition. So the exhibition became a kind of exhibition machine, and at the end actually we had I remember, but more than 300 different variations, 300 different exhibitions, and because I think it's just, I mean, with that ingredients you can do so many almost endless type of, you know, um, you can produce endless type of outputs or kind of solutions, and this is to me was also a way to dismantle a bit kind of the power of the kind of the curator. Also, I was really thrilled by the idea that someone can make a better show, but also what does it mean to make a better show, and also very often is seen by in terms of aesthetics or like formal displays, and at the end is about writing. It's like writing in a space, and I mean, it was a very simple idea, but which the but to me wanted to kind of also produce reflection on different levels on many things, and I remember that the educational department of the Kunsthalle were very exciting about this exhibition. Luca, finally an amazing workshop. We loved this idea of this exhibition, which actually was against the idea of workshop is completely. He didn't want to have a kind of hierarchical attitude towards like the visitors, but basically saying that it's not there is no difference, but um, at the end, through the variations, uh, I witnessed some um, um, yeah, some very inspiring ways of dealing with that things, with that works. And so also the exhibition, it works in that way that you if you decided to re-hang the works, then you had all the time you wanted. There was no limit, so you can do it like 5 minutes or like 7 hours. And also this is not a detail, because if you would have a slot, then it would become a workshop, or like using kind of a bit kind of gimmick, I don't know. And then after you would say, okay, done, the show is done. um, a Polaroid was taken of your exhibition and hang on a wall, so in order to give the next um, person the chance to have a feeling of the previous iterations of the exhibition. And then they were taking other photos, and we also produce a book with a rendering of the different exhibition. But also to me was interesting to say, is an is a show this space with these works on the floor or not? That's a simple question, but yeah, I feel that is still an interesting one. So, uh, yeah, Marley uh, produced these two amazing fluffy fluffy hammers, very heavy. Uh, then there was yeah, Amalia Pica, Jonathan Monk pay a bit an homage to Franz West, these are original chairs by Franz West, that of course when West was alive, these were functional chairs, but now they became kind of uh, objects that you cannot even touch. Um, this was a guy, he did this kind of performance. Someone made a pile of all the works on one on top of each other. So the only let's say limit was not to damage the works, but then you were completely free. Um, these were different wooden letters and so on. Um, so the last show I did in Vienna um, uh, is a show called Time is Thursday, and I, I don't like group exhibitions because I find very boring and usually not generous towards the visitors. So I don't like to use the works to illustrate a theme. And also in this case of the show you just saw, to me was important that all the artists kind of produce a new piece. That same exhibition with pre-existing works would have been very different. I would have been critical also um, in certain way. So this show was um, I'll try to show you a clip. So basically, so the Kunsthalle Wien was founded in 1992, and I've been always obsessed with time, and so I started to think, okay, I wanted to try to do an exhibition as if I was in 1992. So I started for like a few months to really pretending to live in 1992. So I was just reading things of 1992, listening to music from 1992. Like then I said, okay, would be a completely a failure. Would be just like a stupid kind of curators game that you write, but then it doesn't work. And so at the end, I opted to trying to put in sync 1992 and 2019 when I had the show. So I selected a number of works from 1992 and other works from 2019, and the idea is that you couldn't see a difference between the two kind of temporal dimensions. I also asked a smell maker, Sissel Tollers, to create a scent of 1992. And so in Vienna, so I went to her studio. I would like to know if you're able to recreate the smell of Vienna from 1992. And then I asked, I also wanted to have music in the show. This is also what I like a lot, to have music and sound in exhibitions. And so I asked Peter Reberg, who died unfortunately last year, to compile a playlist of tracks from 1992 when he was DJing, and then I asked instead a younger duo to do a new playlist from now. So every day you had one day Peter, one day Vipra, and here you see basically the same images with different shades of light, because also I ask a technician to have the lights changing um, within 15 minutes, which is, I thought, okay, what's the average time you spend in an exhibition? Maybe 15 minutes. And so this was very slow. So was not like from pitch black to full light. So you notice that something was changing, and I asked also the photographer to document the exhibition through three different gradients of light. And this is a good example. You had Onkawara original piece 1992, and Xavier Aballi, who is an artist that as an hobby is continuing to do Onkawara, and he's not selling the works, he's just giving as a gift to people and asking just to send a photo of where you are, where you display that work. And so I send a photo of the painting in my bedroom. That's it. He made a book of the different people collecting his own works. And this is Giorgia Sagri and Willem de Rooij and so on. And I also, because it's a bit like writing a screenplay for a movie, you need some kind of tricks. And so I selected some newspaper clippings and articles from 1992 that to me were very were resonating a lot at the time. And so there is an article about this group of right-wing riots against immigrants that happen in Germany, or then I also put work by Eileen Miles that in 1992 Eileen Miles decided to candidate for the elections, for the US election, and I asked the designer of the show to make a new design of this newspaper clippings. So also in 1992, the first text message was invented. And the guy who invented it sent the first text message was "Merry Christmas," and so there was written "Merry Christmas" on the wall. And this is a tattoo that I did is a work by Claude Kloski. Also part of this exhibition was reactivating a project that a gallerist, Florence Bonnefuse from Air de Paris, did in 1992, and she asked many artists to conceive a work as a tattoo, as a unique, a proper work that was sold at the time, but very few of these works were actually sold. And this was a response to of course, to HIV that at the time was really kind of booming. And so for Florence was really also a very, she was very attached to this project. And I asked to reactivate, but they didn't want to present the documentation because most of the artists sent proposals by fax or like drawings. But I asked 10 people to choose to pick up a work that they like, and we paid the making of the tattoo. And this is also something that I like a lot, that there are 10 people in the world that are still keeping work that they chose. So I didn't have a control of 10 of these artists that were in the exhibition. And so they're keeping the memory of this exhibition still alive. And every time someone is asking, what's this? They can immediately kind of bringing to life this show. Sorry. And this was one of the was a bit the music of the. Oh, sorry, I cannot stop this. But the two images you saw is a piece by Pierre Joseph, a French artist who did in 1992. He created this amazing work that is characters to be activated. So in different group shows, he was presenting different characters like Catwoman, Superman. So for the opening, you had this performer wearing, I don't know, the costume of Superman. They were going around the show. And then immediately after the opening, there was a photo of the performer, and the photo was displayed in the exhibition. So in the case of Pierre, I asked to present the photo of these Kodak kids, and then I asked to reactivate the work now. So we had new Kodak kids performance in the show, and we took a photo. So it was creating a sort of mise en abîme kind of idea, and now more and more what I like is when I go to a show and I feel lost, that I don't understand things instead of. So is more and more when I do, especially a group show, this is what I'm trying to achieve, and and um, and this also, that is the last show I want to mention before talking about macro, is a show when I was invited to do a residency in France. Um, So I was invited to do this residency in France, and so as you know, each region has a different institution called FRAC. They have a collection, and I had to work with the collection, but there was no space available because the exhibition space at the time was closed, and I started to really think about the status of these objects, and so most of, like, the FRAC had almost 1,000 works, and there were so I was thinking about the fact that most of the works in public collections are kept in the storages, and some of these works, especially like in museums like the Met, there are certain manuscripts that you cannot even, they cannot see the light, so they cannot be shown. And so I was thinking, okay, but these objects, how do they exist? How do they affect our kind of collective knowledge? And so I decided to, I um, I asked to to get a photo of each work, and then I produce a different postcard for each work with just a caption, so the photo and the caption below. Then I went to the library in Reims of this Carnegie Library, and I selected a different book for each work, meta work. So I pick up 788 books. And then I spent 3 months doing this. And then I insert each postcard in this different book. And they're still there. So I like the idea of moving a collection, a meta collection, to another type of a collection that is this library. And also I, I still like the idea that the students, or it's like someone kind of picking up a book, then can jump and encounter this postcard and maybe can take it or like putting in another page. You know, this idea of not controlling is still another, is quite crucial here. And also questioning the way we 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 look at art, and there is nothing at the end so strange about, you know, um, but the fact more and more we tend to what we see are JPEGs of works, not actual works, because you know, if you study art history, you study uh, works as images that you will never see, you know, in your life, in real life. Um, and so all these exhibitions, in a way, and kind of uh, um, produce the ground for what I'm doing at Macro. Already when I started to work at Kunsthalle Wien was not really planned, so I did it just to try, and then thanks to Nicolas Schaffhausen that it happened. And because to me institutions were always, you know, doing since I did a magazine exactly because I wanted to create my own institutions. You know, institutions to me are still very critical of what an institution is, because I always feel that it's not the space where you can make exciting things, but it's the place where you're mainly kind of constrained. So you have, of course, a chance of visibility, of working maybe with bigger budget, but very often you're also very kind of limited. And so to me was a really sort of struggle, and say, okay, what can I do if now I'm like from the other side? Um, and So when I made this proposal for the museum for Macro. So Macro is the Museum of Contemporary Art of Rome. Is funded by the city of Rome. So it's like a local museum. It's quite big. It's like 10,000 square meters. It's made of two very different type of architecture. So you see through this staircases from that side is a former beer factory. So you have this industrial space from one side, and this black big room is part of this new kind of wing that has been designed by a French architect, Odile Deck. As often in Italy, you know, these museums have been very much affected by the influence, the bad influence of politics. So they changed director. Every time there was a new cultural attaché, they were changing directors, curators, and so on. So anyhow, I said, okay, this is not a real museum. So let's try to really use it as a, not to use it, but to let's try to make something different that can yeah, transforming these sort of limitations into like into yeah, something that could be positive at least. So the first thing I did was considering that I had only 3 years to run this museum, was to transform the museum into an exhibition that lasted 3 years. Now it's 4 because it was the pandemic, and this was a very simple move, you know, um, and and again, this, of course, I was very influenced by artists that can easily like turning something very difficult into something easy just by yeah, changing the way you see it, that thing. And and so I decided to yeah, to turn this museum into an exhibition project, and the name of this program, and now the name of the museum in a way is Museum for Preventive Imagination, and the title is an homage to a group of artists that in the mid-70s created an office for preventive imagination. Was a group of very kind of politically engaged artists who had no space, and so they were basically using the old city as a space. So they were inviting other artists to produce like big billboards, magazines. They were kind of distributing posters and so on, like mainly printed matter. So I like the idea that you can make things with nothing and with small means. I think it's very important. Still, like thinking that ideas they're still cheap. Um, and also I like that they created an office in the 70s, thinking about, you know, the experience of, you know, artists like Philippe Thomas, also of like groups like Bernadette Corporation, these, and then since the architecture was so kind of complex because it's really kind of a bipolar architecture, I thought, okay, we need a certain structure to kind of survive. And so I decided to apply the structure of a magazine to the museum. So you have different rooms, different exhibition rooms, and each of them corresponds to a section of this magazine. And I started in 2020. At that time, there was no exhibition running, so just to give you a feeling of the status of this museum. And then the pandemic started, so was the first show open before the summer of 2020. And I decided to inaugurate this project with a group exhibition titled Editorial, keeping like the idea of the magazine, keeping in mind the idea of the magazine. And so there were many works spread around the museum, including like this is the storage of the is a storage, and there is this work by Trisha Donnelly. So using also the all these dysfunctional parts of the museum, and because that's also the problem, because very often the architecture of these contemporary museums, they're never functional, but then often you see that artists and curators, they tend to relate to this space as they were functional. So if you have like a room that is oval, it's wrong to think that is like a square. And so yeah, different works, and actually I like to bring in Rome, and for this inaugural exhibition, two works that were in the last show in Vienna. And so this is the new wing. This is the auditorium, and this is instead is the old part. And as a instead of creating a logo, I ask an artist to draw an octopus, which is the avatar of the museum. So this is Veronica Janssen, as in the last show in Vienna. And at the entrance, so the beginning of the exhibition, I present this fax that was sent by Seth Sigelob when he was working on the on this artist rights agreement with a New York lawyer, and when I discovered this fax, I was really interested by it, excited by it, because of course it's such first of all, it's very straightforward, and it's really, you know, first of all, this artist right agreements is still used by I think S.M.A.K and Daniel Buren, they're still using, was produced in 1970, and this is a fax that Sigelob sent to many artists, mainly like the artists he was working with, so Barry, Buren, so conceptual artists, and I like that was, you know, the point 4 is would be possible for artists to control museums, and and um, and also, you know, the whole collection of Sigelob is at the MoMA, and as a poor museum like Macro, you know, and we work like a Kunsthalle, so we improvise a lot. So there was no way to get the original fax, but I wasn't interested in the original fax. So I asked the widow of Seth to, if it was possible, just to make a copy of it. So this is a scan of the fax, and next to it was a poster by Philippe Thomas, "Ready-mades belong to everyone." And so to me, this was the statement about this museum, a museum that is really influenced by artist thinking, and is really we always try to to follow the artist in to make also things that usually you cannot do in museums, and of course sounds very generic and sounds a bit random and abstract, but I think at the end what is missed today is the urgency of creating something, also of artists are invited also to respond to certain formats, and so um, is a bit the same approach with exhibitions, you know, not tend to invite, yeah, um, to create a kind of positive struggle. And so when I was mentioning like columns and sections, so each room is introduced by this very kind of yellow fluo cover, where you have the title of the column and a short description of it. And so one is about arrhythmic, so um, artists, poets, filmmakers, um, which who are yeah, who have been forgotten, but also this, you know, is also a very kind of common trend of the last 10 years to rediscover um, artists that have been, yeah, uh, you know, thinking that history is always alive is something I strongly believe in. The problem is a bit with House Museum that um, nowadays is the market very often that is kind of dictating this. So like rediscovering artists is also um, is very convenient also for the market, and is also very problematic because this should be um, research done by a gallery is different that done by a, you know, someone that is into like doing a proper research instead of just doing a research to kind of create an aura in around an object in order to increase the value. Um, so the first show was about artist called Wolfgang Störkle, um, who died very young. He was living in LA. Or like Lisa Ponti, the daughter of Joe Ponti, that she had her first show when she was 70 years old, and she was always making a drawing every day. She made more than 3-5 drawings on a A4 paper, and this show was in a room. So the rooms are in the old part of the museums are identical, so same size, like 130 square meters, and and I thought about this show as a horizon. So I asked to reframe all the drawings in order to function as a sort of film strip. Also, she made like thousands of drawings, so it was not important the single drawing, but more the overall idea. So to kind of share the approach of Lisa or like Patrizia Vicinelli. So another question that to me is important, since in the museum uh, we have lots of non-visual uh, objects or non-objects presented, is how you can make a show of a poet, or how you can present um, non-objects kind of practices, um, avoiding to kind of make them flat, you know. So um, and also this museum is for free, and so it's also is quite crucial to find a way to kind of include also people without being self-referential. So especially like with books, or often you tend to put everything under like vitrines, and this is, I mean, that's the worst you can do also, because that's the beauty of book is usually they are cheap and you can read it alone, not in a inside these horrible spaces like these the museum's rooms. And so um, I don't know what's the solution, but this is also a way to, yeah, trying out. Also one section is also about design, graphic design. That's also another um, important distinctive element. So you have rooms focus on different languages. One is graphic design, one is music, one is publishing, and one is, in a way, exhibition making. In the format here is quite simple. There are designers that they work in this very expanded, following this very expanded approach, like making books or doing identities or teaching, doing exhibition design and so on. They have carte blanche to present not so much what they did in terms of, I don't know, like products, but more to showcase their attitude to design. And I mean, it was not really kind of intentional, but I invited several Belgian designers, and so there is this fixed structure in the museum. So in design, that room is like in design, and so every 3 months you have a different exhibition responding to the theme. And again, we go back a bit to the show in Vienna, where you have certain rules, but these rules are meant to be used to produce improvisation. And so if you come back more than once, and that's also the importance of having a museum for free, where every time, new contents um, are kind of updated, are added. So nothing is, if you come every week, you have a different element. It's really like refreshing the page of this magazine. So this is Vier Fünf, Goda. This is the first show, was Boy Verreken, that I met in Vienna. Julie Peters. So, for instance, Boy worked with reproductions, like he enlarged, he blew up some spreads of books, and then he, instead of the reproductions, he presented the original work. So this, for instance, is a book of Annette Kelm, and that's the page where in the book you have reproductions of these 6 photos, and you have these 6 photos, physical works, on the show following the display of the book. This is Julia Born, a Swiss graphic designer who collected a number of inscriptions that she found home on the walls or on ancient modern buildings or even graffiti, and they were kind of translated into the walls of the space, keeping the one-to-one scale, and they were really inscribed through kind of cutouts or kind of, and then you have a booklet there with kind of giving a bit of context on each inscription. Or I created a room which is a listening room. So it looks like this. It's completely soundproof. You have one of the best sound system available, and is a room to listen to recorded music. So there is nothing live, and also in the program is is uh, um, is kind of I'm a, I'm juxtaposing like labels for musicians from like 60s and 70s with very contemporary like authors. So for instance, now we have Fatima Al-Qadiri, but the next will be Paulino Oliveros. And again, I think it's quite important to fight against this way of insularization of really also polarization of thinking and of opinions and of positions, which are this approach is really dominating the world of today. And while I think it's important to create movement between these polarities, and it's exciting to really um, to provide an experience of a museum which is not linear, and and this on one way is very inclusive, in the sense that we invest a lot of energy to make all the rooms, all the design very kind of catchy in a certain way, but at the same time it's important to yeah to I mean to drag someone in, but then it's also important that you, as a visitor, as a reader, um, you have to be curious, and you have to make an exercise in terms of reading, and so I like that most of the people visiting the museums are not like saying I like this show or not, but it's more about the experience they have, and the fact that they can, each one can make their own kind of uh, composite of this magazine, uh, because you are mm, you're visiting, you're like witnessing, you're experiencing very different type of positions. Also, you know, you have certain artists at the same time that are also almost opposite in terms of ideology in a way, or approach. And I think it's important not to um, being always coherent, and yeah, to create a bit of chaos, but in a good way. And um, so this is another section. It's called rehearsal, and artists here are invited to play with the idea of an exhibition that could be like. Uh, I started by thinking, okay, often artists, they have works that are still in this unborn status, so they are still like rough ideas, or maybe they exist but they are still not ready to go to be delivered. And I like exactly this idea of when something becomes something else, which again is a bit the question of that show in Vienna, or like thinking that you can do a show, and after a month you can add an element, you can change it, you can do whatever you want, and um, and this instead is similar to the exhibition at the Casa de Chirico, that lasted a year, and you can change, add, remove some elements. Um, so this, for instance, is a show of um, Reba Maybury, and or this is the show we have right now, is of a show Robert Smithson. Um, you say why Robert Smithson in this rehearsal exhibition? Because it's a show of early works on paper by Smithson. Most of them they're shown here for the very first time, and so it's a bit also kind of presenting like the unseen, or like B-sides of artists that could be very well known. Um, this, just to give you an example, is a show of Nicolas Guagnini. Uh, was the way uh, how it was at the beginning when it opened. At, at so the after 1 month and a half, we kept some works, but we present in different ways. So there were 2 videos on plasma. They were like projected big on a wall. So also the idea, what does it mean to see the same video on a monitor and on a wall? And then we added some sculpture, and we remove other works. So this was at the beginning, and this is the other version of it. This Anna Sofia Berger and Tik Ramos, Soshiro Matsubara, and or another idea was this of kind of is almost writing an essay on one artist and then adding and or like inserting some hyperlinks, but do it in a real space. So these is a section called polyphony. So we investigate one author and we start with a focus of a number of works by this author, and then we add and we juxtapose works by other figures next to it. So this is the Philippe Thomas or Lee Scratch Perry, Salvo, Friedel Kubelka. So really like different kind. And the project I did in Reims kind of reappear here. So you see everything is very connected. One section is focused on the collection of the museum, and instead of presenting the works from the collection, I asked a photographer to take pictures of the works in the storages, in the depot of the museum. So you have this wallpaper made with these blown up images, black and white, of the space of the depot, which is actually in the underground space. And on top of this, we are presenting works by young Italian artists, physical works that are added over let's say that every 3 months we had new works. So it's not, we are not replacing, we are just adding. So it started like completely empty, only with the images, and now we have more than 20, 25, if I'm not wrong. This is instead the main space where the idea is to invite artists to kind of relate to the idea of the exhibition as a work. This is a show of Jason Dodge. This is a show of Diego Perrone, which is at the moment, Cinzia Ruggeri, Tony Coates. For instance, with Tony, there were 4 screens in the space, and we presented 15 works, and you had the videos were not played at the same time, but you had it was like a score. So you have first screen with a video till the end, and then switching to another screen. But to me was also very important the idea of sound, which is an essential element of Tony's work. And so we had an amazing sound system that, so yeah, we had both kind of a stereo sound, so with 2 speakers next to the screen, but we also had speakers all around the space. So the idea was transforming the whole room into a kind of giant boombox, and so you can, even if you were not watching the footage, you could listen the sound if you were a bit like not in front of the screen, and this I like. I always thought about, is a similar experience if you go to a cinema and then you go to the bathroom and you're still listening to the film, to the sound of the film, and then we had some of these video stills presented as billboards with nothing written on it all around the city. And this was Nathalie Dupasquier, or this show is also a good example of what I was mentioning before about the attempt to present in a way that can that can be an added value about, presenting, I don't know, publishing house. So this show is about a publishing house called Hanuman Books. So how you can present the history of of a press, of a book press, and so these are small books produced in Madras, in India, by Francesco Clemente and Raymond Foyer between like the mid 80s and the early 90s, and in this case, all the books are presented all together as a set, as a line, but the point to me was about how to present the archive. So the archive of Hanuman was given by Raymond to this university in Chicago, and was very expensive and complicated to get the original elements, items from the university, and so I decided to work with the scans. So we scan a number of these elements, and then with the designer, I asked him uh, to think about the floor as a big page and to display these images and text on it. And so is a floor kind of installation in a way where you walk. I like the idea of walking on an archive, and and yeah, or like this, for instance, uh, is a show where I commission a number of artists to um, also in this case to reactivate old technique is this forage book painting, so painting on the edge of the books. So when the book, so the tradition was painting on the edge, and then these were painted gold. And so when the book is closed, you cannot see the image. You have to flip through the pages. You have to doing like that, and and so was also fun to see all this from Androvekua, Camiro, Kerstin Brach, Taube Auerbach, that they had also to kind of relate they have to discover how to deal with this sort of new old new technique, and the show was done between the space of Macro and Biblioteca Herziana, and because also I thought thinking about the book, which also has been an ongoing obsession, also in relation to an exhibition, and how that the pages of the book at the end are like the walls of a space, and again there is nothing new, but when I was studying at the university, when I discovered the Xerox book by Seth Siegelab was really like play a huge impact on me, because they say, you see, I don't have money, I don't have a space, I can make a book as an exhibition, and of course I also want to emphasize how at Macro we presented these books more as paintings, and again there was this kind of landscape, while at Herziana, in this, which is one of the most important libraries, I would say, in the world in terms of art history, they were presented more as books. And of course the context is completely different, also because the people and that are at Herziana usually are students that are like all the time close on the books, very nerd type of um, academics, and so I also wanted to create a kind of bridge and bringing like the Hertziana um, fellows to the museums and vice versa, and and also this going back to the house museums is how to intervene and how work in such places without making just this room with this fresco by Zucchero is incredible, and but yeah, instead of placing like a sculpture by a random artist or whatever, um, this was quite punctual. Also in this case, there was a long discussion with the director because they never host exhibitions inside Herziana, and and yeah, and yeah, but I stopped talking right now, and so please ask me some questions if you have, or and yeah.
Yep.
For everyone. Just a small question. Earlier you said that you find a group show around the theme really boring and boring, I think.
Boing.
Yeah, boring. No? You said it
A
at
group
one.
exhibition
Yeah,
is boring.
group
Yes.
show. Like yeah, a group
Yes.
show especially around the theme using pre-existing
Thematic.
works. Yeah, thematic, and could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, because usually like thematic group, not group exhibitions, like thematic group exhibitions very often are like using artworks as illustrations of curator's idea, while I think I like to see shows and works where I can project something personal, and I have a room to me to kind of add something, while very often in that case is yeah, I just take but I cannot give. After now you mean? Yeah. I, I really don't know. No, but for real. Uh, yeah, I never plan um anything. So as Vienna was, it's a chain of. Um, to me it's really essential to have fun and to be. So I'm uh, even if it's really exhausting, also because macro, we work. We are a team of 15 people, and to run this like 24 shows every year is a bit insane, and so I decided to run like 100 meters, you know like crazy, also because the time was very short, and it's not possible to continue that, otherwise you die, and yeah, but I this is a footage from this Lawrence Winner exhibition that I did right after the pandemic in the summer of 2020 in the sky along the coast in Rome, and what I like of Lawrence besides the work is also that it was someone that could do a show at Gagosian, and the day after in a space run by a student that was asking to do a show, and yeah, it's a bit like you can work in 10,000 square meters and then working in this room. Yeah, of course it depends on you, but yeah, I don't have specific ambitions. I don't. Yeah, the only ambition is really like to still feel excited about that, and it's also to me hard to kind of doing lectures on this, on exhibition making, because it's really dyslexic, conceptually dyslexic the way I do it. And yeah, also this show I had it like many years ago. I was standing like on the beach and just thinking, okay, think about an exhibition instead of this I love you or Lazio merda written on these banners. You have a show of Lawrence Wiener, and I did it without believing that, could have been done, you know. And I believe that if you are really, yeah, I know that this can sound a bit cheesy and romantic, but you know, when I wrote to Lawrence Wiener, it was like we did it in 2 months, and I never worked with him. I didn't know him, and you know, but if they are like, I like when people can be excited about doing something, and if you're able to, yeah, to touch that point, then, but yeah, it's important to feel excited, and that's what I still I still think that everything I learn from the artists, and so yeah, it's important to look also uh, outside of the art. That's is very important, because it's very also most of the stuff I see I find very boring. I don't read art magazines. I find very boring. So it's important to keep your mind fresh and yeah, to believe. I mean, that's also wanted what I wanted to explain, that is today art is became an industry, a cultural industry, which was until maybe 15 years ago, and was already like, but today is really, and is really an industry as like the music industry, like in terms of also the economy, and also the way the economic dynamics are kind of dictating the way artists, curators, museums, artisan space work. Then there are still many exciting things, but in general, in terms of like the bigger frame, so it's yeah, it's important to have fun, to be excited, and to really say, okay, I don't know what to do, or I don't know.
It seems like the relationship to books is, I mean, it's really, really central to your practice. There was one visitor who came in with a pile of books that you made for you to have signed, and yeah, you also founded Nero magazine and the Xerox books by Siglaub. All these kind of elements, they're super influential to your curatorial practice. Also, when you walk through the Macro Museum, it seems like you have a very editorial approach to curating, I find, like with these different sections. So I was really curious if you could maybe tell us more about your approach to bookmaking, catalogs, because you haven't really mentioned that.
Yeah. So as much I dislike thematic group exhibitions, I dislike catalogs. That I think they're completely useless most of the time. The only like reason that they can be useful are like the documentation being like documents, but they're not, because very often they're published already for the opening, and so like all these biennial documenta, as you know, you have no photos of like of the shows. So yeah, I mean, also with the idea of macro, maybe more than publishing, I think it's very much about the idea of editing. In fact, also with the magazine, at the beginning we were writing. I founded together with 3 friends. At the beginning we were writing all the articles, and at a certain point we stopped writing, and I thought it's more interesting to write as editor, to putting different, juxtaposing different elements, and it's also a bit how it works at macro, and of course the section about publishing is connected to that, because I believe publishing is a language, is a practice so essential today, which is absurd that is present in museums only in the very often in the form of art fairs or like festivals, but not proper kind of exhibition. And I also understand, because it's very, very difficult also to me. I don't know. It's just an attempt to do something with, with books and publishing, and also, for instance, with Lawrence, this was such an ephemeral exhibition, was 10 days, and so I asked him to produce an artist book with just like no text, just photos for each work, and also that inaugural exhibition, Editoriale. The show was done really after the first kind of wave of the pandemic of COVID-19, and we were surrounded by all this kind of nonsense and completely useless material produced by all of us, including us as a museum, that I say, okay, let's not do a proper catalog. And so I asked 10 writers in Italy to come to visit the show and to write a text about the experience they had. And there were no limits. So they told me, okay, but should I mention all the works? No. Also in that case, some artists could be also pissed, because they say, okay, but this is like, my work is not mentioned in this. Even there was a list of works, but the main idea of that book is that there were no images of the works. So there were just this text, and at the end, this book was in a way a catalog of a show, but was more like a book of literature, and was sold out and was mainly circulating outside of the art world. And this, to me, again, is the kind of outcome of this way of trying to think in both ways. I like the idea that people going to a random bookshop, they pick up this, and they're not interested in art, and it's not important that they know about this artist, this exhibition, and so on, and they can just create an image of that thing. And I find honestly much more poetic instead of writing. I mean, you have really interesting people that are writing about art. I'm not blaming anything about that, but in general, I think it's much more, yeah. When the I don't know, when in Afghanistan the museum um, um, was destroyed, when there was the huge fire in Brazil, the museum destroyed all these objects that were kept there for 100 years, thinking that these objects disappear or they became ashes or they start to melt into each other. This is such a strong thing to imagine and force you to relate to that object and to think about many things on many levels in a way that is much more stronger of many attempts that we all do as kind of cultural practitioners. So it's yeah. Uh, it's yeah. I mean, reality is very often is always stronger, you know. So it's you have also as a museum, as a public museum, it's important to kind of to run at this double speed, to be aware of where we are and where we stand, but at the same time to be detached from that. And this condition of kind of of being bipolar, it's also a very common condition today. And so I like to imagine the museum as a lithium.
Nice. I think we almost have to wrap up because some people might have to catch their trains. But
Yeah, me too.
yeah, you too. Is there like one more last question, or I think we can wrap up if that's fine with you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.